Imagine
for
an
the
empire so vast,
glory
its borders are a
of
myth.
Rome.
An empire that stretches from the burning sands of Egypt to the frozen mountains of the Hindu Kush. An empire of 10 million souls, 1,000 cities, and an army that darkens the plain like a living forest of steel and spear. This is the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the first superpower. And it is about to die. Not in a long, slow decline. Not in a protracted war of attrition. But in a single afternoon. On a field of its own choosing. At the hands of one man, a king barely out of his teens, leading an army he has not lost a single battle with. This is not the story of a battle. This is the story of a collision of worlds. This is a tactical masterpiece, a gambit so audacious, so reckless, that to this day historians can scarcely believe it worked. This is the story of the day Alexander the Great looked into the eyes of a god-king, saw an army of 1,000,000 men, or so the legends say, and saw only an opportunity. He would not just defeat this army. He would annihilate it. He would not just win a battle. He would shatter an empire that had stood for 2 centuries. And he would do it all with one single devastating charge. But to understand the sheer scale of this madness, you must first understand the abyss that stood before him. You must understand the man who believed he could not lose, and the boy who believed he could not fail. The year is 331 BC. 2 years earlier, a young Macedonian king, Alexander, had crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor. He was a meteor from the west, a student of the philosopher Aristotle, and a vessel of pure, unchecked ambition. He had already shattered 2 Persian armies at the Granicus River and at Issus. At Issus, he had humiliated the Persian king of kings, Darius III, forcing him to flee the battlefield, abandoning his mother, his wife, and his children to Alexander's custody. But a wounded king is a dangerous king. Darius had retreated to the heart of his empire, to the sprawling, fertile plains of Mesopotamia. He had time. Time to gather an army the likes of which the world had never seen. This was not to be a force to merely stop Alexander. This was to be an instrument of absolute, total obliteration. From the 24 satrapies of his empire, Darius called his banners. From the shores of the Caspian Sea came the fierce Hyrcanian cavalry. From the deserts of Sogdia, horse archers who could fire with pinpoint accuracy at a full gallop. From India, warriors atop armored war elephants, creatures that looked like moving fortresses. From the heart of Persia itself, the legendary immortals, 10,000 strong, their spears tipped with gold. And from Bactria, the finest heavy cavalry in the known world, the hammer to his anvil. Ancient sources, prone to wild exaggeration, claim Darius assembled over 1,000,000 men. Modern historians estimate a more plausible, but still staggering force of between 200,000 and 250,000. Against this, Alexander could muster perhaps 40,000, maybe 47,000 at the very most. The math was simple. For every one of Alexander's soldiers, there were 5 of Darius's. This was not a battle. On paper, it was an execution. Darius chose his ground with cunning perfection. The plain near the village of Gaugamela was wide, flat, and meticulously cleared of obstacles. It was a giant chessboard, and Darius was ensuring there were no bumps to disrupt his grand strategy, no terrain to protect the outnumbered Macedonians. He even had his engineers level the ground further, creating a perfect killing field for his 2 secret weapons. His scythe chariots and his massed cavalry. He wanted room to maneuver. He wanted to envelop this impudent Macedonian fly and crush him in a vise of steel. Alexander, marching south from the ruins of Tyre, knew what awaited him. His scouts, his spies, his own eyes told him the terrifying truth. His army, veterans of 100 skirmishes and 2 major battles, saw the horizon shimmer with the campfires of the enemy. The scale was incomprehensible. The morale of his men, once unshakable, began to crack. Fear, cold and palpable, seeped into the Macedonian camp. And here is our first great surprise. The logical move, the move any sane general would make, would be to fortify. To dig in. To find a defensible position and force Darius to come to him. His senior generals, the grizzled old wolves like Parmenion, advised exactly that. Attack at night, they said. Use the cover of darkness to offset their numbers. But Alexander was not a sane general. He was a predator. And he saw something in this terrifying panorama that no one else did. He saw a flaw in Darius's perfect plan. A flaw so profound, it was invisible to anyone who thought conventionally. He looked at that vast, open plain and didn't see a death trap. He saw a runway. A runway for the single most decisive maneuver in military history. He refused the night attack. I will not steal a victory, he declared. He would face Darius in the open, in the light of day, and break him for all the world to see. It was an act of supreme arrogance or of supreme genius. That night, he slept so soundly his commanders had to shake him awake at dawn. While his entire army trembled, their king was at peace. He had already won the battle in his mind. Dawn broke on October 1st, 331 BC. The two armies deployed. The sight must have been soul-crushing for the Macedonians. The Persian line was so long it stretched beyond the horizon, its flanks seeming to disappear into the morning mist. In the center, standing tall in a golden chariot, was Darius III himself, surrounded by his royal guard and the apple-bearing immortals. His position was unassailable, a fortress of men. On his left flank, he placed the bulk of his Bactrian and Scythian cavalry, a tidal wave of horsemen under the command of his brilliant cousin, Bessus. Their job was simple: smash the Macedonian right flank. On his right flank, a massive force of Syrian, Mesopotamian, and Median cavalry under the trusted Mazias. Their job was to pin and crush the Macedonian left. And in front of his entire center, poised like coiled serpents, were the scythe chariots. Their blades gleamed in the rising sun. These were the Persian battle tanks, designed to rip through tightly packed infantry formations. And Alexander? He did something bizarre. He didn't form a straight line. He arranged his army in two main blocks but at an angle. His right flank, which he commanded personally with his companion cavalry, was advanced. His left flank, under the steady Parmenion, was refused, held back. It looked like a strange, lopsided arrowhead. His famous phalanx, with their 18-foot-long sarissa pikes, formed the center, but they were not a solid wall. He left gaps between his units. Gaps. To any observer it looked like amateur hour. It looked like the formation was already breaking apart before the fight even began. Parmenion, on the left, must have been horrified. Gaps in the line? That was an invitation for the enemy to pour through and slaughter them from the inside. But Alexander knew. He knew exactly what Darius was going to do. He had studied him. He had fought him. He understood the Persian mind. Darius, from his glorious central position, would see these gaps as a weakness. He would see the advanced right flank as an opportunity. He would take the bait. The battle began not with a crash of infantry but with a movement. Alexander, inexplicably, started marching his entire army to the right. Not directly at the Persian center but diagonally towards the edge of the flattened plain. It was a slow, deliberate, almost casual drift. At first, Darius watched, confused. What was this boy doing? Was he trying to outflank him? The Persian line was so long, it was impossible. Was he trying to move off the prepared ground? That was it. Alexander was trying to negate the scythe chariots by leading his army onto rougher terrain. Darius couldn't allow that. The entire purpose of this chosen battlefield was to unleash his chariots. He ordered his left-wing cavalry under Bessus to engage. To stop this sideways drift. The Bactrian and Scythian horsemen surged forward, crashing into Alexander's screening forces on the far right. The battle was joined. But this was just the feint. The first move in a high-stakes game of chess. As Bessus's cavalry crashed against Alexander's right, they became locked in a brutal, swirling melee. Darius, from his chariot, saw his left wing fully committed. But Alexander kept drifting right. This was a problem. If Alexander continued, he might actually slide off the prepared battlefield. Darius had to act. He made his second move. He ordered his scythe chariots to charge. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The chariots, pulled by armored horses, their wheel hubs fitted with spinning, razor-sharp scythes, thundered forward. Their target, the seemingly vulnerable Macedonian center, the phalanx with those terrifying gaps. This was the climax of the Persian plan. The chariots would tear through the gaps, sowing chaos and dismembering the phalanx from within. The very formation that had made Alexander's army invincible would become its tomb. The ground shook. The Macedonians watched these engines of death bear down on them. This was the test of their discipline. They had been drilled for this exact moment. As the chariots closed, the phalanx did not break. They did not close the gaps. Instead, the front ranks parted with chilling precision. They created alleys, funneling the chariots directly into the killing zones they had prepared. The charioteers, expecting to crash into a solid wall of men, found themselves racing harmlessly down these corridors. And as they did, the Macedonian light infantry, the hypaspists, stationed within the formation, reached up and butchered them. They slashed at the horses' legs. They grabbed the drivers and pulled them from their chariots. They stabbed and hacked. The fearsome scythe chariots, Darius's ultimate weapon, were wiped out without achieving a single significant casualty. They were like a wave breaking against a rock, and the rock had opened up and swallowed them whole. The Persian center was now stunned. Their grand weapon had failed. And at that precise moment, while Darius was reeling from the shock, Alexander saw it. The flaw. Alexander's constant drift to the right had done more than just draw out the Persian cavalry and chariots. It had stretched the Persian line. To maintain contact with Alexander's shifting army, the Persian units to the immediate left of Darius had to shuffle sideways. They lost their cohesion. A gap, a small but critical tear, began to open in the Persian line. It was right next to Darius himself. This was it. The single moment the entire battle, the entire campaign, had been engineered to create. This was the kairos, the opportune moment. The flaw in the perfect plan was Darius's own, immobile, glorious command post. In trying to control everything from the center, he had created a weak spot. Alexander stopped his drift. He formed his companion cavalry into a wedge, a spearhead. He turned, and with a force of perhaps 2,000 men, he charged. Not at the army. Not at a unit. He charged directly into the gap, aiming straight for the heart of the Persian Empire. Straight for Darius. This was the single charge. This was the moment an empire vanished. The companion cavalry, the finest shock troops in the ancient world, hit the gap like a thunderbolt. They tore through the thin screen of troops around Darius. Alexander himself was at the tip of the spear, a white plume in his helmet, a beacon of destruction. He was not fighting soldiers. He was carving a path to a king. The Persian royal guard fought desperately, ferociously. It was a swirling, chaotic, close-quarters slaughter around Darius's chariot. Ancient sources describe Alexander and Darius being close enough to lock eyes. Close enough for Alexander to hurl a javelin that missed Darius but killed his charioteer, standing right beside him. And in that moment, Darius III, the King of Kings, the great king, the king of the world, looked into the eyes of the young Macedonian madman and saw his own death. The stories say he froze. The weight of his empire, the shock of the failed chariots, the sheer, terrifying velocity of Alexander's assault, broke him. He lost his nerve. In a moment of pure, abject panic, Darius did the unthinkable. He leaped from his royal chariot, scrambled onto a horse and fled the battlefield. He abandoned his army. He abandoned his empire. He abandoned his family for a second time. And here is the second great, shocking twist of the battle. The Persian army was not defeated. Vast swathes of it hadn't even fought yet. The right wing under Mazias was actually winning, pressing Parmenions' beleaguered left flank hard. But an army, even the largest army in the world, is nothing without its head. The news spread through the ranks like a poison. The king has fled. The king is dead. The will to fight evaporated instantly. The mighty Persian center, the immortals, the royal guard, they collapsed. Not from military defeat, but from psychological annihilation. Their god-king was a coward. The cause was lost. A rout began. The greatest army ever assembled turned into a terrified, leaderless mob. But the battle wasn't over. While Alexander was pursuing the fleeing Darius, hoping to capture him and end the war in one stroke, a desperate message arrived from his left. Parmenion was in dire trouble. Mazias's cavalry had broken through and was attacking the Macedonian camp, while a large contingent of Persian and Indian cavalry had circled behind Parmenion's lines, surrounding him. Alexander was forced to break off his pursuit. He turned his companion cavalry around and performed a feat of incredible command and control, charging back across the chaotic battlefield to relieve his trapped general. The rescue was successful, but the delay allowed Darius to escape. He would live to fight another day, but he was a king without a kingdom, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own power. The aftermath was a slaughter. The Macedonians, sensing total victory, pursued the fleeing Persians for miles. The ancient historian Arrian claims Macedonian losses were a mere 100 men with 1,000 horses killed, a certainly impossible underestimate, but a testament to the scale of the victory. Persian losses were catastrophic, likely in the tens of thousands. They had been caught in their own trap, on their own perfect plain, and annihilated. Alexander marched unopposed to Babylon, which threw open its gates in surrender. He then took the ceremonial capitals of Persepolis and Susa, seizing the unimaginable wealth of the Persian treasury. The empire of Cyrus the Great, of Darius the Great, of Xerxes, was now the possession of a 25-year-old from a small kingdom in northern Greece. The Battle of Gaugamela is the ultimate lesson in the power of the mind over matter. Alexander did not win because he had a better army. He won because he had a better plan. He understood that to defeat a hydra, you do not cut off its heads one by one. You drive a spear through its heart. He turned Darius's greatest strengths, his vast numbers, his central command, his secret weapons, into fatal weaknesses. He used the enemy's own power and predictability against them. He proved that an empire is not made of land and gold and men. It is made of an idea. The idea of invincibility. The idea of divine right. The idea of a king. And on that day, on the plain of Gaugamela, Alexander the Great took that idea, held it up for the world to see, and shattered it with a single decisive charge. The empire didn't fall in a decade or a year or even a season. It vanished in an afternoon. And the world would never be the same again.